"I'm desperate for a man's warmth," said the giant Apache girl to the widowed rancher. The widowed rancher had lived alone for many years, long enough that silence had become his closest companion. His ranch sat far from the busy roads, surrounded by open land, dry grass, and a sky that always seemed too wide. Every morning he woke before the sun, not because he had to, but because sleep never stayed with him for long. The empty space beside him reminded him of what he had lost. His wife had passed away years ago, yet her memory still lived in every corner of the house. Her cup still sat on the shelf. Her old shawl still hung behind the door. He never moved these things. They made the loneliness bearable. He was a hard-working man, known in nearby areas for being honest and fair. People respected him, but they did not know him well. He kept his words few and his emotions locked away. After his wife's death, he had promised himself that he would never let anyone close again. Love, to him, felt like a beautiful thing that had already ended. He believed reopening his heart would only bring more pain, so he focused on his ranch, his animals, and the land. The work kept his hands busy and his thoughts quiet. Not far from the ranch lived an Apache woman, tall and strong, with a presence that was impossible to ignore. People often noticed her height first, then her strength, then her quiet confidence. But very few ever noticed her loneliness. She came from a proud background, deeply connected to her people and her culture. Her roots were strong, but her daily life was filled with challenges. The modern world did not always know how to treat someone like her. Some people were uncomfortable around her. Others made quick judgments based on her appearance alone. She carried herself with dignity, but inside she felt a deep ache. She had spent years being strong for everyone else. She had helped family members, supported elders, and stood up for herself in places where she was not welcomed easily. Over time, she learned to hide her softer side. She rarely spoke about her need for comfort, for understanding, for warmth that went beyond survival. People saw her strength and assumed she did not need care. Her days were busy, but her nights were long. When the sun went down and the world became quiet, her thoughts grew louder. She missed the feeling of being close to someone who understood her without judging her. She missed simple human connection, not attention, not praise, just warmth, just presence. These feelings stayed locked in her heart because she feared being misunderstood if she ever spoke them aloud. Fate began its slow work through something ordinary. A broken fence line near the ranch had crossed into land close to where she lived. The rancher noticed it one morning while checking his property. Fixing fences was part of his routine, but this one required help. His age was beginning to show in his joints, though he rarely admitted it. He reached out to the local community, asking if anyone could lend a hand for a day's work. When she heard about it, she decided to help. She was used to physical labor and did not see it as a burden. When she arrived at the ranch, the rancher was surprised. He had not expected someone like her. Tall, confident, calm, he greeted her politely, though a little awkwardly. He had grown unused to new faces, especially ones that brought an unfamiliar energy into his quiet world. They worked side by side under the sun, mostly in silence at first. The sound of tools, animals, and wind filled the space between them. The rancher noticed how focused she was, how carefully she worked. There was no rush in her movements, only steady strength. She noticed how he avoided unnecessary talk, how his eyes carried a tired kindness. As the day went on, small words were exchanged. Simple things, about the weather, about the land, about the work. Slowly, the silence between them changed. It no longer felt heavy, it felt shared. During a short break, they sat on the ground, drinking water. The rancher offered her some food from his bag. She accepted with a grateful nod. Something about the moment felt different, not dramatic, not sudden, just real. She looked out at the land and spoke softly, almost to herself. She said that places like this felt peaceful, but peace could also make loneliness louder. The rancher froze for a moment. Those words touched something deep inside him. He did not respond right away. Instead, he listened. She did not say much more, but the honesty in that one sentence stayed with him. For the first time in years, he felt seen without being questioned. He realized that she carried pain similar to his own, even though their lives had been very different. When the work was done, he thanked her sincerely. She smiled, a real smile, not the polite kind people used out of habit. Before leaving, she told him that if he ever needed help again, she lived nearby. He nodded, unsure why her words felt important. That evening, after she left, the rancher stood alone near the fence they had repaired. The land looked the same, but something inside him felt slightly shifted. He could not explain it. He only knew that the silence no longer felt as empty as it had that morning. For the Apache woman, the walk home felt lighter. She replayed the day in her mind, surprised by how comfortable she had felt around someone she barely knew. She had not been judged. She had not been stared at. She had simply been treated as a person. Neither of them knew it yet, but a quiet connection had begun. One built not on words, but on shared understanding, on loss, on strength, on the simple truth that even the strongest hearts can feel cold when left alone for too long. The story was only beginning. The days after that first meeting passed quietly, but neither of them forgot it. The widowed rancher returned to his usual routine, waking early, feeding the animals, checking the land. On the outside, nothing had changed. But inside, small thoughts kept returning to him, thoughts he had not allowed himself to have in years. He found himself remembering her calm voice, the way she worked without complaint, the honesty in her eyes when she spoke about loneliness. These thoughts did not disturb him, but they unsettled him in a gentle way, like a door opening slightly after being closed for too long. He tried to push the feelings away. He told himself it was nothing, just a brief human moment. Still, he noticed the silence more clearly now. The house felt larger at night. He sat on the porch longer than usual, watching the sky darken, thinking about how easily the day had passed when someone else had shared it with him. He did not want to admit it, but the memory brought him comfort. For the Apache woman, the days also felt different. She returned to her own work and responsibilities, helping her community, handling daily tasks with the same strength she always had. Yet she felt something new beneath the surface. It was not excitement or hope. It was a sense of being understood, even if only briefly. That feeling stayed with her like warmth after standing in the sun. She reminded herself not to read too much into it. Life had taught her to be careful with expectations. A week later, the rancher noticed another small problem on the ranch. A water line near the far end of the property needed checking. Normally, he would handle it alone, but his shoulder had been aching badly. Without overthinking, he remembered her words about living nearby and offering help. He hesitated for a long moment, standing in his kitchen with his phone in his hand. He had not asked anyone for help in a long time. Finally, he made the call. When she arrived, there was no awkwardness. They greeted each other with a quiet familiarity, as if they had already met many times before. They walked toward the water line together, talking lightly as they went. The conversation flowed more easily this time. They spoke about simple things, about how the land changed with the seasons, about how hard work shaped a person's life. As they worked, the rancher noticed how comfortable he felt in her presence. He did not feel the need to guard his words. He did not feel rushed. At one point, he mentioned his late wife without planning to. The words slipped out naturally. He expected pain to follow, but instead he felt relief. The Apache woman listened quietly, not interrupting, not offering empty comfort. Her silence was respectful, steady. She shared a little about her own life too. She spoke about growing up between tradition and change, about learning early that she had to be strong in order to be taken seriously. She did not speak with bitterness, only honesty. The rancher realized that strength in her case was not something she chose, but something life demanded of her. They took a break by the water, sitting on a low fence. The sun was warm, the breeze gentle. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she said something simple but powerful. She said that people often believed strong people did not feel lonely, but that loneliness did not care how strong someone was. The rancher felt those words deeply. He nodded, unable to speak for a moment. He confessed that after his wife passed, he had stopped allowing himself to need anyone. He said he thought it was easier that way. Saying it out loud made him realize how heavy that choice had been. She did not judge him. She simply said that protecting oneself was natural, but shutting the world out completely could also cause harm. As the afternoon wore on, the work finished more quickly than expected. Neither of them seemed eager to leave. The rancher invited her to stay for a simple meal. He was surprised by his own words, but he did not take them back. She accepted, grateful but calm. Inside the house, time seemed to slow. The rancher prepared food the way he always did, simply and quietly. She sat at the table, observing the small details of his home. She noticed how carefully everything was kept, how nothing seemed out of place. It felt like a house frozen in time, holding memories rather than creating new ones. They ate together, talking more openly now. Not about deep pain, but about daily life, about work, about the small moments that made life meaningful. The rancher laughed once, softly, surprising himself. She smiled at the sound, feeling something gentle shift between them. When it was time for her to leave, neither rushed. At the door, there was a pause. He thanked her again, this time with more warmth in his voice. She told him she was glad she came. Their eyes met briefly, and in that moment both felt the same quiet understanding. This was not about rushing into anything. It was about allowing connection to exist. After she left, the rancher cleaned the table slowly, replaying the day in his mind. He realized he did not feel guilty for enjoying her company. Instead, he felt human again. He knew fear still lived inside him, fear of loss, fear of change. But alongside it now was something else. Hope, small but real. For the Apache woman, the drive home felt peaceful. She thought about how natural the day had been, how she had not felt the need to hide any part of herself. She knew that being open carried risk. She had been hurt before by misunderstanding and distance. But she also knew that moments like this were rare and worth acknowledging. That night, both lay awake longer than usual. They thought about the same things without knowing it, about how two people, shaped by loss and strength, had begun to share space without fear. About how warmth did not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrived quietly, through shared work, honest words, and the simple choice to stay present. What neither of them knew was that this connection, still fragile and unspoken, would soon be tested. And how they faced that test would change both of their lives. The days after their second meeting passed with an unspoken understanding between them. Neither the widowed rancher nor the Apache woman had expected anything to come of their encounters, yet both felt the quiet pull of curiosity and connection. The rancher found himself thinking about her while feeding the animals, while the Apache woman thought about the gentle steadiness in his eyes and the way he had listened to her without judgment. It was strange for both of them because neither had allowed anyone so close for years. The world had taught them caution, yet now there was a subtle shift neither could ignore. One morning, the rancher noticed another small issue on his property. A gate hinge had rusted, making it difficult to open. Normally, he would have fixed it alone, but something inside him made him reach out to her again. Perhaps it was the comfort of her presence, perhaps the memory of their last conversations. When she arrived, they greeted each other with a quiet familiarity. It was no longer the awkward politeness of strangers. Instead, it was a recognition, a simple acknowledgement that both understood the loneliness of the other. As they worked together, the conversation began to flow naturally. They spoke about small, ordinary things, about the animals on the ranch, the dry seasons, the changes in the land, and the little joys of morning routines. And then, almost without realizing it, the rancher shared a memory of his late wife. He spoke softly about how she used to laugh when the cows wandered off, about how she loved planting flowers near the porch. His voice was calm, almost hesitant, but there was relief in finally speaking these thoughts aloud. The Apache woman listened, not interrupting. She understood that grief was not something to be hurried, fixed, or judged. When he finished, she shared a little of her own story. She spoke of growing up in a family that valued strength, of learning early that life often demanded more than she was ready to give. She spoke about feeling isolated at times, despite being surrounded by people who admired her for her abilities. Both realized that their loneliness, though different in origin, was similar in feeling, a quiet ache, a longing for understanding. As the afternoon went on, they worked quietly on the hinge, but the silence now felt comfortable rather than empty. There was a rhythm to their movements, a rhythm that spoke more than words ever could. At one point the rancher paused and looked at her. "It's strange," he said softly. "I haven't talked to anyone like this in years." She nodded, understanding perfectly. "It's rare," she said. "Sometimes people see strength, and they forget there's also a heart behind it." They took a short break under the shade of a large oak tree. The wind was warm, rustling the leaves above them. They shared water and small pieces of bread. Neither rushed to speak, yet both felt the presence of the other deeply. She leaned back against the tree and said quietly, "I think we both learned long ago to carry things alone. But maybe sometimes carrying together isn't so bad." The rancher looked at her, feeling a mix of surprise and relief. Her words were simple, but they struck him deeply. Over the next few weeks, they continued to meet under different pretexts. She helped with minor repairs on the ranch. He occasionally guided her through the tasks that required careful handling of animals or equipment. Each meeting built upon the last, not through grand gestures or dramatic confessions, but through small moments of trust, laughter, and understanding. They began to notice things about each other. The way he hummed softly when concentrating, the way she adjusted her sleeves before lifting heavy objects. These small observations became points of connection, a language of familiarity that neither had experienced in years. One evening, after a long day working in the fields, the rancher invited her to stay for dinner. They sat in his kitchen, eating simple food. The rancher noticed how natural it felt to have someone else present. There was no need for conversation, yet they spoke through glances and quiet smiles. After the meal, he finally asked a question he had avoided asking for a long time. "Do you ever feel like no one really understands you?" He did not expect an answer. She looked at him calmly and said, "All the time, but sometimes understanding doesn't need words, it can just be shared." Her words stayed with him. For the first time in years, he felt that it was possible to share his life, even in small ways, without fear. He realized that he had spent so long protecting his heart that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to be alive in someone else's presence. Likewise, she realized that being strong did not mean being alone. There was a quiet courage in letting someone in, a courage she had not fully acknowledged before. Their relationship grew steadily, quietly, but it was not without challenges. Both had walls built over years of loss and caution. They were careful with their words, careful with their actions. Neither wanted to rush the connection, yet neither could deny its presence. They learned to balance their independence with shared moments. When one was tired, the other offered help. When one was hesitant, the other offered patience. Slowly, trust formed, not out of necessity, but out of mutual respect and understanding. One afternoon, while working near the river on the ranch, they paused to watch the water flow over the rocks. The rancher spoke about how the land had taught him patience. The Apache woman nodded, saying that her life had also demanded patience in unexpected ways. They sat together, silent, watching the sun reflect on the water. In that quiet, both felt the simple power of being present for each other. There were no promises, no grand declarations, just the understanding that they were no longer entirely alone. As the sun began to set, they walked back toward the ranch, their steps in sync. Neither spoke much, but each knew that the other understood. They had broken down some of the walls they had built around themselves, not through force or urgency, but through gentle, steady presence. The rancher realized that he could allow himself to feel again without fear of losing control. The Apache woman realized that she could trust another person without fear of judgment. When she left that evening, both felt a quiet sadness at the parting, but it was mixed with hope. Hope that these moments would continue, hope that the trust and understanding they had found could grow. They had not yet spoken about love or companionship, but they had discovered something just as important: the ability to be vulnerable and accepted. For the rancher, the quiet nights no longer felt as heavy. He could sit on his porch and watch the stars without feeling completely alone. For the Apache woman, her days felt lighter. She could walk through her community without the weight of isolation pressing down. They had found a bridge between their worlds, built not on dramatic gestures but on simple human connection, and it was strong enough to carry them forward. Little did they know, the challenges that lay ahead would test their bond in ways neither expected. They would face doubts, outside judgment, and the pressure of their own fears. But for now, they allowed themselves to simply exist in each other's presence, to share warmth and trust. And in that quiet, ordinary way, something extraordinary was beginning to grow. The quiet rhythm of their growing friendship began to face its first challenges as whispers and questions started reaching them. The widowed rancher noticed that some of the neighbors looked at him differently. Simple greetings came with subtle curiosity, and small remarks often hinted at surprise that someone like him could form a connection with a woman from the Apache community. The rancher had spent years keeping to himself, avoiding attention. Now, suddenly, the attention was personal, and it made him uncomfortable. He had always been a man of solitude, proud of his independence, but the gentle connection he shared with her made him reconsider whether solitude was truly what he wanted. Meanwhile, the Apache woman also felt the pressure. In her community, people admired her strength but were cautious about her personal choices. They expected her to remain self-sufficient and unbending. When they learned she spent time with the rancher, some raised questions about her motives, her judgment, and whether opening her heart to another person would bring complications. She had faced judgment many times before, but this time felt different because the bond she was forming was personal, quiet, and sincere. These opinions weighed on her, creating an internal struggle between loyalty to herself and the desire to nurture the connection she had begun. The rancher, aware of his neighbor's opinions, began doubting himself. He wondered if he was making a mistake by allowing someone into his life. What if he opened his heart only to lose control of his emotions again? He thought about his late wife, about the love they had shared, and the pain of her absence. He questioned whether moving forward with someone new was a betrayal or a necessary step toward healing. These doubts were heavy, yet the memory of her warmth, honesty, and the ease of being together pulled him back from complete withdrawal. One afternoon, the rancher invited the Apache woman to help with a more demanding task on the ranch, repairing an old barn roof before the winter rains arrived. The physical labor required both of them to work closely, moving boards, lifting beams, and steadying tools together. In these moments, trust became tangible. They depended on each other's strength and coordination. Yet even amidst their shared work, both felt the subtle tension of what others might think. The rancher caught himself hesitating before speaking, worried that his words might reveal too much to anyone who happened to observe. The Apache woman felt a flicker of hesitation as well, wondering if showing vulnerability in a world that often misunderstood her would leave her exposed. During a short break, They sat on a fallen log at the edge of the barnyard. The rancher finally voiced his concern. "People notice," he said quietly. "They notice that we spend time together and they question why." She nodded, understanding. "They do not know what we have," she said. "They only see what they expect." But expectations are not always reality. Her voice was steady, but the rancher could see the tension in her eyes. He realized that for both of them, the outside world was now a subtle, pressing challenge. Despite the doubts, they continued to meet and work together, each encounter strengthening their bond. They shared stories of past challenges, his loss of a partner, her years of needing to appear unshakable. They spoke honestly about fears that they had carried for years. The rancher admitted he was afraid of being judged for allowing someone new into his life. She admitted she was afraid of being misunderstood, of being seen as weak if she allowed herself to need comfort. In sharing these vulnerabilities, they discovered a deeper layer of trust. Yet challenges persisted. Some neighbors were not subtle. A few remarked openly about their connection. The rancher overheard comments questioning why he, a man known for his reserved nature, would spend time with someone so different from him. At first, he felt anger and frustration, but he also felt doubt creeping in. He began to question whether the peace he found with her was worth the scrutiny and gossip. For the Apache woman, subtle gestures and glances from her own community reminded her of past experiences where people had judged her harshly. These moments made her pause, reminding her that opening her heart always carried risk. One rainy afternoon, the rancher found himself pacing inside his house, thinking about the upcoming tasks on the ranch. He realized he had been avoiding a simple truth. He wanted her presence in his life, but he feared the reaction of the world outside. He recalled her words from their last meeting, about understanding not needing words. That thought gave him courage. He decided that while judgment from others was inevitable, the warmth and trust they shared were more important than fear. The Apache woman faced her own internal struggle that evening. She reflected on her life, realizing that strength had often been her shield, but it had also been a barrier. She had protected herself by keeping distance from others, but she now understood that connection was not weakness. Allowing herself to trust the rancher did not diminish her strength, it enhanced it. She resolved to embrace the bond they had formed, knowing that it required courage to move forward despite doubts and external judgment. As they met again, there was a noticeable shift in their interaction. Both were cautious but determined, aware of the stakes but unwilling to let fear dictate their choices. They worked together with quiet focus, each action reinforcing their reliance on one another. During a pause, the rancher glanced at her and said, "I don't know what the future holds, but I do know that I feel safer with you here." She smiled softly, a smile filled with understanding, warmth, and courage. "And I feel the same," she replied. The rest of that afternoon was spent repairing the barn and sharing stories, laughter, and small moments of silence that felt comfortable rather than empty. They spoke of hopes, not just fears, imagining possibilities for the days ahead. It was the first time they allowed themselves to envision a life beyond the boundaries of solitude. For the rancher, it was an awakening to the possibility of companionship without guilt. For the Apache woman, it was a recognition that opening her heart could bring strength as well as comfort. However, even as their trust deepened, the whispers and judgments from the outside world lingered like shadows. The rancher felt the weight of expectation pressing down on him, and she felt the pressure of scrutiny from those around her. It was not easy to navigate, but together, they learned to create a space where only their understanding mattered. Each encounter became a choice, to value warmth over judgment, presence over fear, trust over doubt. By the end of the week, they realized something profound. Their connection was no longer just a comfort, it had become a lifeline. It gave them courage to face the challenges outside their private moments. And while the world might continue to question or misinterpret their bond, They understood that true connection is not defined by opinion, but by mutual care and trust. That week closed with a quiet evening. The rancher watched the sky darken from his porch, thinking about the Apache woman. He realized that the walls he had built around his heart were slowly lowering, not by force, but by steady trust and gentle understanding. At the same time, she walked home under the same twilight sky, feeling warmth she had long denied herself. She understood that vulnerability was not weakness, but a bridge to something greater. They had faced the first tests of judgment and doubt, and while not all fears had vanished, both knew that what they shared was worth protecting. Their bond was no longer simply a meeting of convenience or shared work. It was becoming something deeper, something that could endure hardship, scrutiny, and uncertainty. And in that quiet strength, both found hope. Little did they know, the next stage would demand even more courage, as both the rancher and the Apache woman would face choices that would challenge their trust, their hearts, and the warmth they had begun to share. Yet, having survived the first trials of judgment, they were ready to confront whatever came next together. The days following their quiet tests of trust and understanding brought a sense of calm to both the widowed rancher and the Apache woman, though it was a calm built on careful attention and shared presence rather than absence of challenge. They had begun to understand the weight of judgment, the whispers from neighbors, and the doubts within their own hearts. And yet, despite the pressure, they found themselves drawn to each other, not through sudden declarations or dramatic gestures, but through small, steady acts of care and consistent presence. One morning, as the sun rose over the rancher walked outside to check on the animals. The air was crisp, filled with the familiar smells of hay, earth, and the faint scent of wildflowers from the nearby fields. He paused at the edge of the barn and noticed her approaching along the path, carrying a small basket of fresh eggs. Their eyes met, and there was an unspoken greeting, a recognition that words were not always needed. This small, ordinary moment carried a depth of connection that neither could easily put into words. They spent the morning together tending to the animals. The rancher moved carefully, knowing his shoulder still ached from work the day before. She noticed without commenting, adjusting her steps to match his pace. There was a rhythm to their movements, a rhythm that had formed naturally over weeks of shared labor and quiet conversation. Every gesture, every glance, every small action reinforced the trust they had built. Even as they worked, their minds often wandered to memories and moments they had shared, reminding them that connection could exist in the simplest of acts. After finishing their tasks, they sat together on a weathered bench near the water trough. Silence settled between them, comfortable and familiar. Finally, the rancher spoke, his voice low and measured. "I've spent so many years alone," he said. "I thought it was the safest way to live. But I realize now that solitude doesn't protect you from everything. It only protects you from the chance of warmth." She nodded, understanding immediately. "It's the same for me," she admitted. "Strength and independence have kept me safe, but they've also kept me from feeling truly alive." They talked for a long time that morning, not about fear or judgment, but about the possibilities that lay ahead. The rancher shared small hopes he had been too cautious to voice, like hosting a small community gathering or simply enjoying the quiet of the land with someone he trusted. She shared her own dreams of embracing both her culture and her personal freedom, of finding companionship that respected who she was. In these exchanges, they realized that they were no longer alone in their hopes or their struggles. As the days passed, they spent more time together, sharing meals, laughter, and quiet moments of reflection. They began to understand that the warmth they had sought was not a fleeting sensation or a solution to loneliness. It was the comfort of being fully seen and accepted. Every small interaction, helping with chores, sharing stories, exchanging glances, became a building block of a bond that was steady, resilient, and deeply human. One afternoon, the rancher invited her to walk along the river that ran near his property. The water flowed gently, reflecting the sky and trees above. They spoke about ordinary things, seasonal changes, animal habits, the shifting colors of the land. But beneath the surface of these simple observations was a growing acknowledgement of emotional closeness. He realized that trust had become a foundation stronger than any fear he had carried. She realized that vulnerability had become a bridge, connecting her strength to someone who understood it without judgment. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of gold and pink, they paused to sit on a large rock by the riverbank. The rancher took a deep breath and finally spoke words he had not dared to say before. "I don't know what the future holds," he admitted, "but I know that I want you to be part of it, not as a fleeting presence, not as someone passing through, but as someone who stays." She turned to him, her eyes soft with understanding and warmth. "I feel the same," she said. "Being with you, sharing these moments, it's real, and it matters more than any fear or judgment." In that quiet moment, they understood the profound simplicity of their choice. They were choosing companionship, warmth, and trust over the solitude that had defined their lives for so long. Neither of them was perfect, and neither of them expected perfection. They only sought honesty, presence, and the courage to face life together. The decision was not made in haste or under pressure. It was made slowly, thoughtfully, and with full awareness of the past and the future. The following weeks brought small celebrations of their bond. They shared meals with neighbors who had once been skeptical, slowly earning respect through their quiet demonstration of partnership and mutual care. They attended community events together, standing side by side, finding strength in each other's presence. Every action reinforced the reality that connection did not have to be loud or dramatic to be meaningful. It could be steady, patient, and enduring. On the ranch, they continued their routines, now shared and intertwined. The rancher no longer carried the weight of solitude alone, and the Apache woman no longer bore the burden of strength without comfort. They laughed more freely, shared moments of reflection, and offered support when challenges arose. Through ordinary acts, feeding animals, repairing fences, tending to the land, they discovered the extraordinary in each other: trust, understanding, and the warmth of human connection. One evening, as the sky turned dark and the stars began to appear, they sat on the porch together. The rancher reached over and gently held her hand. Neither spoke at first. Words were unnecessary. The simple touch, steady and reassuring, conveyed what both had come to understand: that they had chosen each other, fully and without reservation. The Apache woman rested her head lightly against his shoulder, and for the first time in years, both felt completely at peace. They knew that life would continue to bring challenges: weather, work, community pressures, but they had built a foundation that could withstand it. Their connection was not built on fantasy or immediate gratification, but on reality: shared experiences, mutual respect, honesty, and the quiet courage to trust again. The warmth they had once sought desperately was now a shared reality, a living proof that human connection could heal even the deepest loneliness. In the months that followed, their bond deepened further. The rancher no longer feared judgment, because he understood that his happiness mattered more than the opinions of others. The Apache woman no longer feared vulnerability, because she experienced firsthand that openness could bring strength. Together, they faced life's challenges with patience, understanding, and the quiet joy of companionship. The story of their connection became one of subtle triumph. They did not need grand declarations or dramatic events to prove their love. It existed in the small things: the way he looked for her when she arrived, the way she adjusted a blanket over his chair when the evening air was cold, the shared glances that communicated understanding without words. In this simplicity, they found the profound truth that had eluded them for so long: that warmth, trust, and companionship were worth any fear, any doubt, any judgment. In the end, the widowed rancher and the Apache woman stood together on the ranch, watching the land stretch out under the wide sky. They were not defined by the loneliness of the past or the skepticism of the world. They were defined by the choice they had made, to embrace life together, to allow warmth to enter their hearts, and to live fully in the presence of trust, care, and mutual understanding. In that quiet, ordinary, yet extraordinary moment, they had found what they had been searching for all along, a true connection, steady and enduring, that transformed their lives forever.